computer. Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Really glad you could join us tonight. My name is Ann Nutter-Kaufman. I'm a manager in our teacher quality department at the NEA. And we know a lot of you are starting to really think about, or not think about, either already are back in a hybrid format, whatever that means, or will be back soon. So we thought it was really important to bring together a group of educators to sort of talk about their experiences and what's been happening. So I just want to thank you for being here tonight, and I am going to pass it over to our host for this evening, Shelly Krajacic. Shelly.
Thank you very much, Anne. And as we begin all meetings of the National Education Association, we are going to begin tonight by acknowledging the native lands upon which we each sit. We begin by acknowledging that we meet on traditional lands served by America's first people. I am greeting you today from the land of the Potawatomi. If you're so inclined and you know the name of the land of the tribe who served the land upon which you sit, please feel free to add it to the chat. We honor America's first people, all elders past, present, and emerging. And we are called upon to share their stories as we continue our learning about America's first people. So thank you for being with us today. We're excited to be here. As Anne said, I am Shelly Krajacic. I happen to be a National Board Certified Teacher, and I serve you as one of the 6 members of the NEA Executive Committee. I'm a 20-year high school English and drama teacher from Wisconsin, and I am super excited to get to learn with all of you today on our exciting panel. So let's talk a little bit about how we're going to do this. We are all coming to this work from various capacities. Some folks have been in face-to-face instruction all year. Some have been in some sort of hybrid. Some have changed from day to day and week to week and don't know which end is up and are trying to figure it out on the fly and in the moment. So we are all continuing to learn together. I want to thank all of you who are acknowledging the native land upon which you sit. I think that's very important. So the various models for the type of instruction that's occurring just abound. They're all over the place. And here's the thing, this is really new to all of us. So we do not have a whole lot of research on what really is the best practice, depending on the type of student, the subject matter, the age group. And so we're all doing our best to figure this out. And that includes our panelists, our own teacher experts who have been living this reality in the field, and they're here today to share and learn with all of us. So the conversation tonight is about their experiences, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what they've learned from, and what they've navigated throughout this, to put it bluntly, very weird year. So let's talk about our rules. If you have questions throughout, please put them in the question and answer thing. I mean, if you have comments, you want to react to something, go ahead and throw it in the chat. We're going to do our best to answer questions in the question and answer, both live as well as responding to them, so some of the answers will be typed in response. So just kind of follow along if you have questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. And so as Anne alluded to at the beginning, we've kind of divided this into 4 sections, and we're hoping we'll cover a lot of your top concerns. So let's go ahead and dive into this. I'd like to ask my fabulous panelists to each introduce themselves, and we are starting with Elizabeth, and if you'll each go in order, that'd be great.
Thank you, Shelly, so much. My name is Elizabeth Lulis. I am an educator in Grosse Pointe Public Schools in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. I always have to think and remind myself, how long have I been doing this? And I believe this is my 22nd year of teaching. Beyond teaching high school English, I'm also an adjunct English professor, and I've been doing that for the last decade. I'd like to say that at this point, I am a high flex teacher because I have worked in just about every model that we think exists at the moment. And I hope this evening you will realize that I have fallen flat on my face quite a few times, and I'm happy to share that with you, as well as what has come out of the process and worked really, really well to help support my learners as we are navigating this year. Thank you. Chrissy?
Thanks, Elizabeth. My name is Chrissy Waldor. I'm a 5th grade language arts and reading teacher in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. I am a hybrid, an in-person and a virtual teacher all at once. So I kind of done all of it all year long since August. My greatest passion is reading, and I would love to tell you about that, but it would take me longer than 2 minutes. So I will toss it over to Troy.
Hello, everybody. I'm Troy Okamoto. I am on Oahu, the smallest one of being in Hawaii. I teach at Radford High School. I teach World History Honors, Participation Democracy, and Modern History of Hawaii Honors, and I also teach AVID for 11th grade this year. And we have done both online and hybrid, and transitioning in the middle of the year is certainly a challenge. So that is what I will kind of address today. I'll hand it over to Emily.
Thanks, Troy. Hi, I'm Emily Polonsky, and I'm talking to you from Novi, Michigan. I am the K-12 science coordinator and a high school science teacher here at and I have been a virtual teacher, a hybrid teacher, and then a virtual and hybrid teacher at the same time. And just this week, we just transitioned to 5 days a week of in-person instruction. So yes, I think we're all in the same boat where we're just trying to figure out how to survive each week and how to do it in a way that positively impacts our kids in this crazy year.
Thank you very much to all of you. All right, we're going to start by diving into a conversation about synchronous and asynchronous scheduling. And to get us into that, we're going to Zoom term of the day, engage in our first of several waterfalls. So here's what you do. We're talking about synchronous and asynchronous scheduling. So if you have a plan, if you've got this figured out, if you've mastered it, we're calling on you to lead the next webinar and enter a 5, please, in the chat. If you're like, oh, dear Lord, I don't even know my name right now, you're a 0 and we love you and we're going to get through this together. So please throw your scale in there, and maybe some of you are in between, and let's see these numbers crank in. Oh, quite a variety of folks. Lots of 0s. I am with you. I will tell you, figuring out how to do anything dramatic in a hybrid was a thing. All right. Folks are coming in. Got some 4s. So hopefully Ann got those names so we can call them for our next to be panelists for us next time. Excellent. You're all doing great. Thank you. So as these numbers keep coming in, I'm going to actually turn this over to Troy. And Troy, I'm wondering if you could tell us, how do you manage being online and face-to-face at the same time? How do you manage this workload? Tell us about your experience, please.
Well, I'll start off by actually saying that I only do asynchronous learning in my class, primarily because just by hearing what other teachers were going through at my school, also just hearing it in general, and some of these scenarios that come about with it, I just found it a lot more stressful if I were to do synchronous. Now, that doesn't mean to say that people in general who do synchronous, it still works out for them in some way. I know teachers who are doing synchronous learning because they have to practice and repeat a certain set of like formulas, or they have to learn a certain set of concepts. It's primarily, I feel like, important in foreign language for them to do synchronous, because if they're trying to learn a language over and over again, I feel like they need that practice. So being online or in face-to-face, they need that. For me, because I teach social studies, I have a lot of leeway on certain things. And one of it is I found that I don't pay enough attention to the kids, the kids online. I don't pay much attention to them compared to who I would in person. And so for me, I felt like doing it from meeting with the kids, the ones only in person, was a lot more viable for me. But again, for other people in their situations, there's a lot of circumstances that people have to do, both synchronous and asynchronous. When I did asynchronous, one of the things was I obviously didn't move from my computer. I had to stay here, and then I had the people in front of me. The other thing too is I always had to make sure that that I was always asking if anyone has questions in the main call versus like people in person. So there's for me, I'm able to have that choice, but I know from what people are saying here, it's a lot of people don't have a choice. And I think that's the only, issue. And hopefully somebody in the panel can like share their experience. What was it like for them to do both, or how is it to do both? For me, I'm doing asynchronous because of the fact that I have that ability to do so, but I know some others don't have that.
Excellent. I saw that Elizabeth has some thoughts for sure.
Sure. So currently right now I am teaching a hybrid model where I meet with my students synchronously. They have asynchronous work, but I also have students joining my classroom who are in quarantine. So some of them are going to have recorded lessons that they've chosen. Others want to Zoom into our class. And then at the college level, I have what's called high flex. So even though I have a planned hybrid course, students who are not comfortable attending face-to-face sessions are able to still enroll in my course and complete everything online. So it's a mixed bag. And so the first process of this, it can feel incredibly overwhelming, but you have to step back just like you would in any unit design and plan and say, what are my learning targets? And then start to navigate which learning targets the students can potentially complete autonomously on their own and function that as your asynchronous work. The other tip that I have that helped me tremendously in planning is thinking about in the same way when we had our normal lessons, we would always chunk and block our instruction into certain minutes. And I know with my secondary students, their attention spans might be longer than elementary, but I could get a good 13 minutes out of them in one particular task before I knew that we would have to move on. So as I'm planning out my asynchronous and synchronous work, I have to consider time elements and chunking methods of what can be feasibly handled for them in that async time. And then more importantly, I have to start identifying what is some of the work that I might not be able to touch. And it's really hard for us as teachers to own that, but there are moments that perhaps the students are functioning in a discussion board, engaging with the text that they completed asynchronously. And if I have them in groups, I can respond to the group of students rather than overwhelming myself of trying to respond to each student individually. And at some point you have to say, this is what's going to merit the best work for them as we're moving forward, and using the synchronous time for that direct, in my context, writing instruction that the students need, or for the more dynamic dialogue that they're requiring of each other.
Thanks. Emily, did you have something you wanted to add?
As I'm listening to Elizabeth talk a little bit, I think we're a little bit in similar situations. I agree. The first thing I had to do was identify the most important stuff, and that's the stuff I did in person with my hybrid kids. And I think it might be useful. Chris, do you think you could toss up that example slide? That is slide 12. This might help a little bit. But basically, I am a virtual teacher and a hybrid teacher, and I had to do all the planning for all of that. And sometimes thinking about how am I going to figure that all out as a teacher was a little tricky. And so one of the things that I did was I thought about it as a whole week. And at Novi, which is where I teach, Wednesdays were virtual for everybody. But then my virtual kids were virtual every day, and that they were in one class. And then my hybrid kids, there was an A group and a B group. And this can all start to make your head spin, right? So before I overwhelm you, I guess what I wanted to share is if you'll look on this visual, you'll see lesson 1 is one that I identified was the most crucial. That's got my face-to-face lesson, that one I wanted to have ready to go. But then I built an asynchronous lesson 2. And as long as whatever I was teaching wasn't sequential for those 2 days, I could flip-flop them. So my group A would do the face-to-face lesson with me, and then the asynchronous lesson the next day. And the group B would do the asynchronous version and then do the face-to-face the next day with me. So I just said, this is the kind of thing I just cannot quite figure out how to do asynchronously. I need to see my kids in person to take them through this. So this is what sits in my head when I try to figure out how to hold all this together, knowing that sometimes I would sit down and say, I don't know how to do this, not sequentially. And in which case then I had to do more asynchronous lessons. I had to have an asynchronous lesson and a synchronous version. And that was just a ton of work for me. But looking at it like this and thinking it like this made it so I only had to make a few of those every time. And then thanks, Chris, that I think we can probably pull that down. The other piece I wanted to say was the 1 hour, which I think is the toughest. And I can see some of you in the chat are in this space right now where you are not, it's not like you have one virtual class and one asynchronous class. They're in the exact same hour. And that is by hard my toughest hour of the day. And I still have one of those right now. I think one of the best things I've been able to do is try to get materials in the hands of kids so that they come to the school and they get these little kits. So they have some things that they can do. So I can hold things up. I'm a medical careers teacher, so it's a fake limb and a tourniquet. So, but we're holding things up on the screen and I'm here and the kids in the class have it, but this one touch point that helps, even if it's little bags of toothpicks, whatever it is that helps us all be moving along, something that can connect us all together. That's my tip.
I'm going to go to Chrissy next, and then I think I'm going to have a question that's pretty directed at you after that, Emily. Chrissy?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak for the elementary side because ours is so drastically different. We have kids that are at daycares with grandparents because they're not old enough to stay alone by themselves, and parents are still working in our area. So for those students that are full virtual here still, they are definitely learning asynchronously. And I had to advocate for that. So for any elementary teacher out there, they were counting students absent and failing them if they missed a Zoom meeting or a Zoom call during the day. And it's not the kid's fault. So it was something that we had to stand up and say, hey, that's not right for these kids. They can't help their situation. We do live in a low poverty area. We've got to find a different way. So they went full asynchronous for the virtual kids because of that. And I record, and that's my tip, is record absolutely everything. And I go lessons in depth through all kinds of videos, but to try to explain it to them and then repeat. So just wanted to shout out for the elementary kids out there.
That's awesome. No, it's important for us to have a balance. So the question that came in the question and answer that I want to start with Emily with, and obviously any panelists can jump in from Zerlina, is what do your asynchronous lessons look like? And Chrissy just got to a lot of videotaping, record everything. You must have a huge hard drive to be able to save all of your videos. But Emily, what are your thoughts on the asynchronous lessons? And then I'm going to go to Troy and ask you to answer that as well, please.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that the spring did for us at Novi is it felt like our time to figure things out, and we failed a lot. And it's one of the things that we realized was if you gave kids a list of tasks and they had to click and go to lots of different places, that they would get lost. And so what I've been building is inside our learning management system, something that we're calling tutorials. And I can actually show you an example of what this looks like. And if I can share my screen here, let's see here. And so these tutorials have a lot of directions in them, but it's very chunked. So it might be, this might be something I would have shown kids that I wanted them to do, but there's pictures of that. And there's a hyperlink to the actual activity that they want to do. And there is a video talking them through what we're going to do. Then there might be another screen which actually has a few questions that are going to check to see if they understand. And then again, I'm walking them through step by step. Now, this is in something called Schoology, but I have seen people do it really effectively in Google Classroom and in Pear Deck. So something that gives clear directions, has an opportunity for them to have little videos for me chunked into pieces, point them towards any handout or thing they should be writing on. And then finally, a chance for them to get some immediate feedback, even though they don't have access to me. Mine are set up within, like I said, this Schoology, but and here we can set it up where they can have up to 20 tries. So they can try it again and again and again, but there's a way for them to not feel so stuck when they're there without me.
Excellent. Troy, did you want to answer that? And then we're going to go on to another question.
Yeah, so for my lessons, because I only see them technically once a week, and then on Fridays we do online through Google Meets. That's our Friday class, and we meet with all the periods. So I would see, for example, I have like World History Honors on Monday for like in person, and then I have another, then they would have online learning at home on Tuesday, and then I would see them on Friday, all online virtually. For the days that I don't see them, which would be for this case on Tuesday, I would usually make a very small, like mini assignment for them to do at home. Now, this is the assumption that I have honors kids. Now, I know in many different situations, you might have kids that don't do the work, or you might have kids that, that will struggle a lot more. But I'm just going based off of, the experience with my students. So I introduce a concept on the day in person to clarify any questions they have, something that would be easier for them to understand and go through during the class session. And that also allows me to do pair shares and brief discussions with them in person, which is different. And then at home, what they do is they will work on an assignment that was based off of what we kind of learned in class. So an example would be like, we would learn how to write a body paragraph where you have giving a topic, sentence, evidence, and then explaining how that relates to the evidence. And then we would practice with that in class. And then on Tuesday, I would give them a mini assignment where I'll give them a prompt, and then they have to write a body paragraph, something very short. But for me, I just give them something very small that was something that they've already learned when they saw me in person. And that will allow them to practice the skills that they would be learning in that they've learned from my class. So whenever I give them assignments, it's only meant for practice. I try not to give them new things, because then they might have a whole bunch of questions that, would be, a lot of answering to do. So I try to make sure that any assignment I give, it's small, but it's only practicing on something that they've already learned in person with me in class.
All right, I'm going to go to Elizabeth, and then we'll switch to a different question. Elizabeth?
So very quickly, there was a comment Troy made that sparked something for me that I wanted to share that has been quite successful for my students. So Troy had referenced that the work they're doing at home is something that's a little bit smaller and something they connect to. And I think making those connections in the asynchronous learning is vital, because sometimes the students are already feeling isolated. So as often as possible, it's in the async smaller assignments that I ask the students to make the connections to their own life, or perhaps within their social groups, or something that might help involve their family as well. And so not only is it a connection to what they're completing within our content, but it's also helping to bring in a little bit more of their personal reflections and their experiences as they're learning from home.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Chrissy, this is going to be the last question on this section, but if you have questions, keep them coming, because I think you'll notice each of these sections of our presentation overlap a little bit. So Mary wants to know, Chrissy, if you can talk a little bit more about your weekly schedule. We saw a high school schedule. Can you help us understand how you do it with the little ones? Because I really don't understand how you do anything with the little ones.
Yes, and mine switched. So I started in August, full virtual in the morning. So 8 to noon, I was full virtual. Noon to 3, I was in person. That is now completely out the window. So when I did that, I would go live every day with my virtual kids and do a whole group lesson or a small group lesson. Obviously now I have kids in the morning, I have kids in the afternoon, and I have virtual kids as well, which is why I switched my virtual to full asynchronous learning. So I have a Loom account. I suggest every educator get your free professional Loom account, because I record absolutely everything. And I talk to them like they are in front of me, and I tell jokes, and I'm just my weird self, so that they feel like they're still in the room with me. But yeah, so that was I was trying to answer Keisha's too on how I do the face-to-face and virtual at the same time. So there's not a lot that I do live at all. I tried, and it was too distracting with kids. And like Troy said, trying to stay in front of your computer, but my kids are over here. So asynchronous is the way for me. And Loom is a website. It's www.loom.com, I think. You get an educator's professional, so you have unlimited recording. It screen records, video records. I record all of mine from my bed at night with my little Bitmoji on, because I have no other time without children around me to work. So it's a bit chaotic, but it works.
All right, thank you all. And as I said, go ahead and keep the questions coming, even though we're going to kind of transition into another section. We're going to start now to talk about instructional models. And actually, some of your questions kind of led into this. And from our panelists, actually, let's waterfall into this first. So finish this sentence for us and just type your answer in the chat. When teaching in a hybrid, high flex model, student grouping becomes what? What does that become? Random, challenging, problematic at best. That was someone trying really hard to be positive. Overwhelming, complicated, chaotic, lots of chaos. Absolutely. Keep those answers coming. Well, once again, we are asking our panelists to answer a couple of questions. And so I'm going to just kind of frame this a little bit. We really want to know, and you've heard a little bit from our panels about some of their kind of best practices or some of their ideas. And so we want to talk about a couple of different things. How do you deal with social emotional learning needs? How do we deal with that? What are some of our best practices? How about learning recovery plans? Any of those kind of broad topics, and we'll narrow it down. And Emily, you're going to intro this section for us, if you don't mind starting. Thank you.
Absolutely. And actually, what I want to do first, because I think social emotional learning is something I have been struggling with this year. And so I'm super excited to include Elizabeth in this conversation because I want to learn from you today. This is something that I want to work on. So if you wanted to start and take that piece first, because I think you have some great things to share there.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And Emily, you referenced something that's hard because I realize I can't dominate our call for the hour, but I think we could have a 5-hour session on resilience factors for teachers and social emotional learning and how we can help build up our resiliency. I'll talk a little bit about some of the tips and tricks that I used in my classroom this year. We started our year fully remote. And so I had my students in Zoom sessions, and then they were working asynchronously. And some of those kids had a very strong disconnect. So my biggest goal was to ensure that they felt invested in the classroom, but I had a lot of students with a lot of anxiety about being in that Zoom setting. And so that necessarily has maybe been alleviated a little bit this late into the year, right? I had a fear of cameras up until the pandemic, so got over that one. Did not even have a photographer at my wedding a million years ago. So really the start of this for me came from mindful practice. And my students and I would have some deep breathing techniques to start our Zoom calls together. And this was a process that helped to also set the tone of almost their language choices and their mood. And when you think about social emotional cults, when we're together in person, my personality and my emotion is going to infect you. And I was really worried with what happens when we're now in Zoom or when my students are working alone. And so using on your platform, your updates, sending out the positivity. If you identify something that someone's done, the good job goes as a shout out to everybody. I focused a lot on, and it was interesting, I kind of been pulling from a lot of different sources here beyond just Castle or Yale. And I really love the text and the whole process of nonviolent communication. So while this isn't conflict resolution, we're dealing with trauma. And so looking at having students identify their observations, giving them opportunities to share their feelings. You're not taking away from your classroom experience by giving students this space to navigate what's going on in their personal lives. And so I had to tell myself it was okay that I might not hit all of my content, and I would recognize what I needed later in order to give my students and front load some of those pieces that were part of it. Asking your students, what are your needs? I had some students who there were equity issues. They didn't have computers at home. Some students are not comfortable sharing their homes and their experiences, and those cameras were going to stay off. And I had to recognize that. Asking your students, what are the requests of me? What is it that I can do to make this experience better for you? And for some of those students, when we talk about even configurations in your classroom, it's recognizing that they need that chance to have their peers. Some of my kiddos in their afternoon time, async learning, they sat in Zoom with me because they were the only ones home at their house. And so even though I couldn't physically be in the room with them, they knew I was there. And they kind of became part of the chaos of my house as I'm trying to teach and have my two who are learning behind me and my husband doing his job behind me. And so when you're looking at your social emotional needs, This isn't something you set aside for later. I do feel like it is part of everything, and it's at the forefront of some of the choices we're making. So Emily, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm happy to chime in later as needed as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was super inspiring. I've been thinking a lot about, again, how in midst of all that I'm managing, I'm trying to support kids in their social emotional learning, and I'm trying to hold it together myself. So I don't know how I can see even from the chat how much stress I feel like a lot of you guys are carrying. And the first thing I want to do is encourage you. I've been doing this since September, and it's been super hard, but you can do this. It's going to be okay. And the second thing I want to say is just give yourself grace and give your kids grace as you're moving through this. And that's been our mantra here at Novi since we've been doing this. We stayed hybrid this whole time. We had to pause. The governor forced us virtual for a little mini of time, and then we're back to hybrid, and now we're face-to-face. And in that time, when I think about my best practices for K-12, because I'm thinking about a lot of our elementary people on this call as well. I'm the K-12 science coordinator in our district. So we were trying to figure out how do we have our virtual students have an equitable experience with our hybrid kids in terms of science investigations. And Chris, I don't know if you're able to throw up the next slide. I think it would have been slide 13 for me, but you're going to see an image of one of the things that we did in terms of equity in our district. And they were these science bags that we already had money allocated to buy science supplies in our district. And what we did was we reallocated some of that money to make individualized bags for our virtual kids. And so you can see one of the best things is how excited the kids get about these materials. And see, this little girl is meeting her, this is her virtual teachers that she's meeting face-to-face for the first time when she picks up her little bag of materials, which includes a flashlight, and it includes, my own daughter got switched to virtual from hybrid because she tore her meniscus, and watching her on the floor of my house take soil samples from the outside and sort it at the same times that the kids were in person, she was part of the class. The other thing you can see, this is my daughter over to the right. She has a little whiteboard, and that's one of the things we actually gave to every child in our district, whether they were virtual or hybrid, because then the kids in the classroom can hold up their answers on a whiteboard, and the kids on the screen are also holding up their boards. And so this is an opportunity, and you can see also she's standing. It's a little way to get her. She's on the computer, but off the computer at the same time. They're writing out. So this has really helped me. It's also helped me now that the kids are coming back face to face, but I have to get them to work in pairs and stay 6 feet apart from each other, which is hard. So they're calculating ratios and percentages, and then sharing with a partner, and they're holding their whiteboard so they can share their work and talk to a partner from it. I call them their shouting partners now. And so these are some of the things that I think have been useful in terms of providing equitable experiences for our kids that are home and in person. And I think for my elementary teachers in science, it's been crucial. We had to be selective. Like I think was mentioned earlier, we're not able to do all of the science experiments at home. But if we could pick the most crucial experiences, and this is where we're going to spend the little bit of money that we have on these little bags, on these things, those are the ones that we're going to use and help connect with kids. And my other big thing that I want to emphasize on asynchronous learning is this importance of still somehow allowing there to be some formative assessment as you move. And so my students continuously do their asynchronous work because I've built something and it's automated. It has to be, because otherwise they're not getting feedback, and I'm not, whether it's in a Google form or whether for us it's in our Schoology learning management system, something that immediately tells me that they've done it and tells them that they've done it. And Pear Deck, whatever it is, something that they know, hey, she sees that I'm doing this, A, and B, oh, I see, I get a little information back right away about how well I did. And that has kept my kids moving along through their asynchronous work all semester.
Okay, I know you all have great different thoughts on this, so you know I'm coming to each of you. Okay, so let's really talk about this. You're hearing some really great ideas from Emily, and in different, some best practices stuff that's happening in her fascinating world of teaching medical technology. So Troy, let's go to you, and then I'm gonna jump around based on level. Troy, Chrissy, and then we'll kind of round things out with Elizabeth, if that works for you. Troy, what are some of your kind of top line best practices that you've found?
Well, I feel like one thing relates to actually what Elizabeth brought up with the social and emotional learning. Uh, I think because we started the school year going online, fully online, so we had to learn how to use Google Meets. We had to learn how to use all of the mechanics of online learning. And I will say that the first year or last year, I was very different from how I was this year. I was very strict, very like I had a lot of like orderly things. I had a lot of just I don't know how to describe it, but I was very different. And this year, I think one thing that I think everyone can agree with is there's been we had to do a lot of accommodations for our students because of the, the uh, fact that we're online. It's new to everyone. We're all on the same learning boat. And one thing was I asked every student when they fill out Google Forms, what are some things I should be aware of uh, going into the school year, just so that I'm aware. And it's interesting, like, I don't know how people think of this, but it goes across all classes, even in my honors, even though the students who are, pretty much up there and they're well-rounded in certain aspects, they're still the same in terms of how they deal with stuff emotionally, right? Across all the other students as well. And so they've been telling me a lot of like they have anxiety or they have this going on at home or they have these issues going on at home. And based off of that too, I had to learn. Because I learn from that about them. They would always tell me their situation, why they couldn't turn in something on time. So I always give them extensions whenever they said this happened, and they explained it to me early on, which I felt like opening that up for them allowed for them to be comfortable to be able to share like why they couldn't get something done or why they're not why something couldn't get completed. It always has to deal with a lot of the stuff that goes on at home because they were at home, all the time. um, and then when it comes to the connection of the students, I feel like the way I did that was I initially started off, we have these things called task sessions, which is also known as study hall in simpler terms. But I would have study hall sessions with my students for my class. And because there's quite a bit of work that they have to do in there, I would actually have these study hall sessions where I would work with them on the assignment. So that way they don't have to worry about it too much when they go home. They just come to study hall, work on it with me, and then they're done with it. And throughout the school year too, I would also have conferences with some of these students, and usually would take place outside of class time, like after school, even in the evening time, because we're all very busy during times of the day. So I would have conversations with them either about their work or about questions they have. And most of the time I would spend like 30 minutes talking to them about the content and then like an hour or two talking to them about like their lives, what they go through. And I feel like that allowed me to also build a connection with them, because we spent more time talking about what's going on at home with them, more so than what's going on with like the content and all that stuff. Even though they were getting that, I was still learning more about them, which I really liked, because the things that people go through, for all students, it's so interesting, um, that kind of thing. And I feel like that, for me, in terms of instructional model, I feel like there's so many teaching strategies that we will all, learn and take. But I think the most important thing is the students and understanding their situation, where they come from, their experiences, because that's what I feel like I connected with the students with, and that's what I feel like motivated the students to do more so in my class, because they all tell me like some of the work that they do is pointless. Sometimes they'll tell me that, but they always said that it was because of the connection. They feel more inclined to do something than if they don't have that connection, which I feel like is the more essential thing that I could possibly give for everyone. Yeah.
Excellent. Chrissy, and then Elizabeth to wrap up this section.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of piggyback on Troy and Elizabeth. So mine really is that when we first started out, our district came down with this virtual learning, here's what you have to do type thing. And it was so strict and so structured. And like 3 weeks in, we were frustrated. Like, how do you get these kids to respond? How do you get them to turn stuff in, especially elementary? And it came to a point where we kind of had to stop, and it came from the teachers. So my whole thing tonight is going to be like, you are so empowered as the educator and the professional, knowing these students in this classroom, speak up for these kids. Because we finally went to them, we were like, no, if we don't start like building this relationship and start them off small, they're never going to succeed. We overwhelmed them already with brand new virtual learning. Now we're overwhelming them with work in a brand new grade. I mean, these elementary kids were absolutely lost little puppies out there. And so we slowed it down, and it worked so well. And now we're to a point where we've been in it long enough. I can build on it. I can give them harder stuff. I can give them assignments that they can challenge themselves with now. But in the beginning, it really was getting to know them, getting them to know the platform, and making sure that emotionally they were okay with our relationship and with this new grade. So yeah, SEL and then advocating for your class. Those are mine.
Thanks, Chrissy. Elizabeth?
So just a couple last points for this. You have to Maslow before you bloom. So that is just a nice reminder to all of us. And with our students, the fear I've heard from individuals within my own staff who I've worked with SEL is they don't want it to be a gimmick. So you ask yourself, how do I invest this then within my instruction? And so I had a couple samples in our slides, but Chris, I'm just going to put a link up right now to a particular sample that I did not post before. And so this is just an example I use with my seniors. And it is when we're reading the Iliad, you think it's about the Trojan War. It's not. It's about individuals who are not all that emotionally intelligent. So I can use this as an opportunity for my students to not only analyze the characters, which is something that's part of our content that we're doing, but then the students are going to analyze themselves as well. And as they were filling out this chart, the underhanded motive of me as their teacher was it was my ahas of kids I needed to check in on. So for me, I try to at least probably every 10 days, almost weekly right now during the pandemic, give my students questions and reflections that invest with themselves as well. And it allows me to know who is it that I need to touch base with? Who is it that I need to connect with? And so I have the beauty of being a humanities teacher. We just finished Greek philosophy. There's a lot of pieces that I can pull with, but no matter what it is that you're doing, you can get creative. I think of Emily's classroom and with science labs. Well, how are those students engaging with each other in their small group communication? Do they have the skill set to know how to navigate it? My American Lit students right now are working on a project for Frederick Douglass. How do they ensure that everyone is going to be responsible for their learning in that project, that they can work well together? So you look at those moments and the opportunities that you have within your instructional design to help the students start building the skills that they need to function well on their own and to enhance their own emotional intelligence. So what we're working on is not just emotional intelligence, but it's emotional agility, if you're familiar with Susan David. So how can our students become more emotionally agile? Because that's something that I think we all need to be working on right now.
That is a wonderful conclusion to this section. So I want to say I have not been ignoring the questions that are based on outcomes and grades. I just knew that the next section was coming. So we're going to now talk a little bit about expectations, and all of that falls into that category. So we're going to do a little waterfalling again. All right, so expectations. How would you describe the balancing act of the expectations between you, your students, administration, and you can even in your head, community, external pressures, the others, all the stuff? Type in the chat. How do you describe that balancing act between those different pieces? Threading the needle. Perfect, Tiffany. Completely not in line. I quickly saw a reference to Lucille Ball. I'm sure it was absolutely perfect. Too little, too much. Death defying. Yeah, most of you are able to do this in one word. Challenging, crushing. Administration is out of touch. This is where it falls, right? You're struggling in that space in between, protecting your students with all of the things we just heard in the last section that we know they need, and yet these expectations that are put upon us. So to get us into the next section, I believe I'm starting with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I believe you're going to start us with this next section. And one of the things I want you to talk about is the external piece. How do we bring the social and racial justice component into this space as well. And if you feel like touching on the other questions we've gotten about those other external pressures and outcomes and grades, please feel free to do that.
Absolutely. So for me, this was a personal journey. After the death of George Floyd in May, I knew I was going down a rabbit hole when I sent an email to our superintendent, our central office administration, and the administrators at the secondary level. And I just said, how can we do better? How can we be better? And I promise you it's much longer than that, but that was the gist of this. And what has come out of this personally within my own building is now a platform for diversity, equity, inclusion. We have a book study that more than half of our staff are invested in, and we are meeting monthly to work through. So Chris, I'm going to ask in our panelist artifacts, if you could click for me on slide 15 and the reference to inclusion. And I won't speak about this too long because everyone will have access to this, and I'm sharing this with you. By all means, take advantage of this. But it's looking at, especially as we're working remotely, we don't have more time, and I realize that. But I had time to reflect, and I had to think about, have all the choices I've been making for the last 22 years been what's best for my students? And am I ensuring that my students are seeing themselves in my curriculum? And so that's been the biggest shift that I've made this year that I'm most proud of as I'm working from home. So I know I referenced my humanities class for you. It is a Greco-Roman Western Civ heavy focus course, to the extent that when I go through my slides and look, all of the individuals who I'm referencing look the same. And so I had a lot of work to do. And so Chris, if you even want to click for me on the inclusion reference, this was a professional development that my team and I put together for our building. And you guys, again, feel free to pull from this whatever it is that you would like to do. But I can't stress enough how important it is that maybe right now is the time to have these conversations, even though we feel so overwhelmed, because you realize now when we do feel so isolated and how marginalized we might be feeling, that this is maybe how students have been feeling, particularly maybe in not necessarily your classroom, but maybe in your district or in their schooling experience for their entire careers. And so I wanted to share this with you. I don't have time to go over all of it with you, but it is kind of a self-guided learning tool that you are welcome to use that could take you through some analysis of your classrooms as well as inclusive practices. So at the end, there is a reference here to the work that's come from Columbia University that is phenomenal on assessing your curriculum and making sure your students see themselves. And also, it's not just an equity piece when we're looking at this from a racial perspective, but also from when we look at our general ed students and our special ed students. And that's been a big piece of this for me as well during the pandemic, is ensuring that my instruction is equitable to all my learners and that I'm giving them multiple means and multiple venues in order to prove their learning to me. So as Emily referenced the value of those formative assessments, I've had to really ensure that I'm structuring my coursework that A, all my students see themselves within it, but B, more importantly, that all of my students can identify a way in which they can present their work. So again, I don't want to overwhelm the night, but this is here for you. Dig in, feel free to email me any questions you have. Honestly, I think this is now the lens of my doctoral work because I'm so passionate about this topic.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So that's an important point to not, just because we're overwhelmed, leave out the stuff that we know we should be focusing on. And I want to call out at Amy, who said, this is the time to dismantle a flawed system. Absolutely. We know that there are significant changes that our institutions need. But you do still have those external pressures. You've got grades and stuff like that. So I'm wondering, Chrissy, can I go to you to talk to us a little bit about some of what you might do with outcomes?
Sure. Sorry. I was just thinking of someone who'd asked a question. So a lot of mine has been really just speaking conversations with my principals, conversations with any admin that will really let me speak to them. And then parents as well. Here's my expectations. How can we get your child there? I try to catch those early who aren't working, because I did have some that started strong and have now slacked and have started failing, which is odd to me to go from an A to an F, but that's fine in elementary. But before it gets to that point, I try to reach out to the parent and let them know, I know you're not home, but here's what's going on. And so discussions all over the board. And as far as grades, I really feel like it was hard. It's hard for me to grade someone that I'm teaching asynchronously, because really I'm not teaching, I'm leading. And it's up to them to take from that video what I really want them to, where in class it would be a discussion and a conversation, and we would go in depth and see where they're at. So for me, it's more, did you do it? I'm going to grade it easily, more of a participatory grade versus an actual ability, until they get back in person and I can get back to what I do best. So it's survival, really, survival in elementary.
Emily, can I ask for your guidance on how do
Absolutely.
we get to outcomes?
I feel like we started off in the spring with basically, we hope they do something and check that box in each week. We called them, we had owls, and they had to earn 8 owls to finish last semester. And I had this lovely Harry Potter reference and everything. But at the end of the day, we have switched to full-on grading here, the high school credits, all those things. And I just want to think a little bit about something that Chrissy said about communication. One of the things that we've faced at the high school is some of the messaging that is coming to the kids and that they're getting from us doesn't match the messaging they're then passing on to mom and dad. And so in the same way that I have made videos for my students, I have started making videos for the parents as well. And so it's like, I even loaded my 10-year-old into our LMS so I could use her as an example and gave her fake grades. So I could be like, let's walk through from Sasha's point of view. If she's, and just telling them things like, your child will have an asynchronous task from me every day. And so if they're telling you that they don't have one, they do. And this is what it looks like. And really, even this is what a tutorial looks like, helping them see what it is their child has to do today. And not, I don't send one every day. I sent one at the beginning of the semester. And then I send them just like tiny little reminders, the positive feedback I've gotten from parents who are overwhelmed. I am overwhelmed keeping track of my middle schooler and my 10-year-old and all her stuff. So this quick, like, watch this and it'll talk you through how this is going to work, has paid huge dividends. And I have made more phone calls this year to talk to families than I ever have. And the conversations we're having are heartbreaking. And so that's the hard part, is trying to like emotionally go home to my own family after I've had all those conversations. But it has helped remind me of why we're giving so much grace and why you're going to tell kids, that's fine. We're going to do fine. We'll try it again. Let's have as many times as, do it as many times as you need to. Let's give this another try, because they might be the only one in their home because everybody else is quarantined from them due to COVID. There's so many not great stories that you're all hearing right now, but those phone conversations are making a big difference, along with the videos, to help make sure that if that grade isn't quite what those kids want, A, there's an opportunity for them to redeem themselves, and B, everybody knows all the various options that are there to help them get where they need to go.
Thank you. Troy, you want to wrap up this section real quickly for us before we head to the final concluding part?
Yeah, so I'll just broadly speak on this, in that regarding expectations, I think everyone here brought up some very interesting points and good points on that. I think one thing that I will say is that, as some people I think indicate in the chat, that communicating with parents is very, very important now more than ever. I say parents / guardians because, again, each lifestyle is different, but they've, got parents and guardians that you have to keep in contact with. But contacting them and always letting them know what is going on is probably the most essential thing this year than how maybe it was before. Because last year I didn't do a lot of I emailed parents when students had low grades, but now what I do is I email parents over just things in general, things that goes on with them, things that goes on with the kids and everything. And it's consistent throughout the quarters or throughout the school year, to keep them up to date with students who are going through social and emotional issues in their time. And I feel like you set up expectations at the beginning of the school year, but throughout the school year you have to communicate that over and over again, both to students and to the parents. That way everyone is on the same page with how your classroom's set up, but also understanding their own point of view as well. That's all I'll say about that.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Now, the good news is that the last section we've kind of touched on a little bit here and there. Emily was leading hard into it. We actually wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about you all as educators and how you balance this whole thing and how you have your own lives. Chrissy, I'm going to go to you, and then I'm going to ask each of our panelists to answer one last question that I'm going to give them. So Chrissy, if you want to start this section.
Sure. So my response always to how do you balance, and someone just asked too, how do you find time to record, is ha 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 ha, what's balance? Because I have none. I was killing myself. I'm not going to lie. August to about October, I was exhausting myself to a breaking point. And I did finally say, no, I have to set some boundaries in my life and in my career. And so I did. So I have clear times where I'm like, okay, tonight I'm going to record as many days as possible for 1 hour. And I may be recording, I've already recorded lessons for the week after our spring break, which is March 22nd. I mean, I'm like trying to backlog them as much as possible, just to have them prepared and ready. And someone else, I think it was Emily or Elizabeth, said, don't record multiple times. No, if you make a mistake, you admit your mistake and you move on, because going back is not fun. To all of that, I do want to say, I think there are a lot of positives that came out of COVID and out of us going virtual and out of us going hybrid. This is a great time for us to be advocates of our profession. This is a great time to use all of these videos that we're doing for future. So I now know next year, if I have to have a sub, it's not a sub teaching my lessons, it's videos of me that I can post still to my students and say, here's our work. And it's still my words and it's my language that I use every day. So I think that's a huge positive. Also, we have a ton of data now. I have data from my students. If you're an elementary teacher, you know all about data because we live off of it for reading. But we have a ton of that now. And I have data from kids at home that are using these programs that I disagree with. And I have data from kids in person that are using the same program and me. And now I can say, look, this isn't working. So let me do my job and let's take away this. So I just think there's a lot to come out of COVID and all that we're going through, that really we have some great advocacy issues and problem solving situations that we can just look for and dive into.
Thank you. So we're coming to the end. And so I want each of you to answer one question in like 30 seconds, because this question is great. Sometimes a disruption in life can lead to discovering new aspects of oneself. What has this year taught you as an educator that changes the way that you look at your career or yourself as an educator? And I'm going to try to keep it to 30 seconds. Okay. Do your best. All right. Emily, I'm going to ask you to go first. I know I didn't give you much warning.
Honestly, it has really helped me. I'm like Chrissy, I can overwork, but my 10-year-old has taught me a lot. She's really into mindfulness. She learned it in 2nd grade. And she even today said to me, you're going to stop and do yoga with me right now. And so I would say I've learned to take a moment and breathe and realize there is no tutorial that I can make that is so crucial that it means I can't do yoga with my kid right now. And so that's been really amazing.
Thank you. Troy, I'm going to go to you next.
The one thing I learned is that I feel like we're all in the same boat: students, teachers, guardians, parents, all of that. One small example is that I had a student fill out a reflection on like what I can improve on and all of that. And I was expecting that a student would say something like not to stress or not to give that student stress on the work that I give them. But they wrote down that I can improve on not stressing my own self out, because they can see that, they notice those things. And I think from that point on, it made me realize that we're all on the same boat, both emotionally, socially, but we're all different in our own way as well.
Thank you. Chrissy?
I think my biggest takeaway is this really showed me my profession is not about the standards, it's about the kids. And this year pushed me into that more than ever, to the point where there's been a few times this year where I'm like, I'll lose my job, but I'm going to be there for that kid. So I think, yeah, that's just it. That this has just taught me to really stand up for what I believe in whether my district's behind me or not. So far they have been, not talking bad about my district, but.
Elizabeth?
So Chris, in my 30 seconds on slide 15, next to the inclusion, the head blowing up, I think links to our conversation. And this document will link you to educator resilience and trauma with some checklists that you can go through for self-care. And that has been my greatest takeaway. Mindfulness has been a pattern here. I meditate daily. I actually get up an hour before the rest of my family so that I have that quiet calm for myself. No matter what my day looks like, I'm better for it. And the biggest piece, I think, is being present in whatever action I'm in that moment. So if it's in my Zoom call with my students, I'm 100% invested in them. If it is that conversation with my children, I'm 100% invested in them. If it's my 5 minutes coffee, I'm 100% invested in that moment. And so that's one of the ways that I think I've been able to handle this past year. And honestly, for me, I've reflected on my flaws. Where was I lacking as a teacher? And COVID taught me that. And so recognizing that and saying, okay, this is your chance to get better.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you all so much. I know I've learned a lot from all of you. This has been wonderful. There have been moments where I want to cry because I'm like, yes, these people are teaching. Yes, we win. This is how we take over the world, starting with all of you and all of you who are here today. And tell us how we can get a free, exciting certificate.
How exciting. Chris, could you please turn to slide 16? On today's slide, you can get a certificate by going to the address that's on this slide in about 2 or 3 days. And we will have the recording, their certificate, and a link to the, yes. So it will take you to our professional excellence storefront, which is different from what you've done in the past. Some of you have done in the past. We are trying to make the experience a little easier and a little better. When you click on the course, you enroll in it. I don't know. You don't have to watch the webinar again. Just click through and you can get to the certificate at the end, but don't tell your friends that. So you just need to go here in order to get a certificate. Okay. And Jen has put in the link several times. Also, just want to flag the feedback, the exit ticket, that if you scroll up, the link is there as well. That information is really, really important. We use that to craft future professional learning opportunities that we have. So please fill it out. We, honest to God, use it. So are there any lingering questions in
The truth of the matter is we could probably go for another about 2 to 3 hours. So maybe it's time that we learn a little bit from Elizabeth and take a moment for ourselves. And stay safe, everybody.
In other words, move on with life and be quiet. That's
and you all matter. So
there you go. Absolutely.
take care of
Thank you guys
yourselves
so
too.
much. Have a great evening.